Hours after the funeral of Sophie Pembroke, and as her coffin was being covered with earth, the Reverend Gaumont has dispatched his manservant, Otto Tsubanski, to gather intelligence pertaining to Sophie's tragic fall and community reaction to her death. Ever obsessed with reclaiming his South Tract from the Pembroke family, the Reverend plots and plans to use the loss of their daughter to bamboozle a grieving Henry and Jane Pembroke into selling him their land. He is no less ruthless when it comes to responding to young neighbour Nancy Dawson's claim that the Reverend himself was responsible for Sophie Pembroke's fall from the cliffs along Delaney Road. Annex, the continuing story of a peculiar bend in the avenue. Traffic goes north, traffic goes south. The streetcar runs between, and all we can do is try to keep up.
Ah, there you are, Tsubanski. A fine and dandy evening to you. I'm finishing this sterling cup of tea that your wife prepared for me before she left for the evening.
Good evening to you, Reverend Gaumont.
I trust you have much to report, my good man. You've been compelled here to my parlor as such. What have you gleaned from your perambulations along Delaney Road? What say the good people of halfway there in reference to the lonely death of their fair Sophie Pembroke?
Hearts are heavy. Miss Sophie was much loved here.
Heavy hearts? Much loved? My God, man, don't be ludicrous. She was here for 5 minutes. You and I, we've been here ages, and we're outside looking in, and she's some sort of fallen heroine. Pardon the pun. Heavy hearts.
I assure you, Reverend, that you are an admired elder and businessman in this place. People look to you.
When they want something powerfully bad and they can't bear asking anyone else.
But yours was a founding family here at Halfway. You preached the gospel.
Tsubanski, nothing is ever gained without giving something else up. Retain that. What of her death itself, the circumstances?
The police, from what I hear along the road, they're calling it an accidental fall.
That's well enough. Unfortunately, I've had my own word that Tom Dawson and his child seek to pin that incurable Pembroke's girl's tumble on me. Perish. Little Nancy Dawson was no witness, merely a close-by nuisance. The involvement of her crusading boar of a father could prove even more troublesome in the long term. Perhaps they'll have to be seen to, as others before them. You have no problems with that, Otto, do you, hail fellow?
As you wish, Reverend. What of the fates of Miss Sophie's parents, Henry Pembroke and his wife? Are they still to be handled, as you said before?
No. No, Otto, we're going to let them live, and instead use this tragedy to our advantage. Grieving parents constitute a buyer's market. I'll pay 'em off, kick 'em off, and once again my holdings will be complete, and I can sleep the night through once more. It's my ground. I want it. I'll have it.
Yes, sir.
And then there's Diana Pembroke, who I hear tell couldn't be bothered to return to bury Sister Sophie. Diana Pembroke Putnam. Her peril is yet to come. Go now, Otto. I have arrangements to make.
Will there be anything else?
No. Yes. Indulge me by keeping your spyglass eye trained on little Nancy Dawson and her father. They bother me.
What shall we do to them, Reverend?
To Dawson and to his precocious brat? Anything we can get away with.
It seems that Sophie Pembroke may not be the last of the victims claimed by the Reverend Gaumont's vendetta against the Pembrokes and their lilac sanctuary. Are Nancy Dawson and her newsman father, Tom, the next on Gaumont's list of victims? How are Henry and Jane Pembroke managing in their grief? And who will cry out for justice for Sophie?
Evening, Hank.
Evening.
I won't tell you it's a good one.
No, you wouldn't. Come in, Tom. Jane and I appreciated having you here at the house today, before and after the funeral. We took strength from our friends gathered together. Diana took her sister's death so hard. She's ill, sent to bed. She couldn't travel, and for Jane's sake, we thought it best to get this done with as soon as possible. Jane, she's hit hard by this. We both are, but Jane, this doesn't fit with her view of the world. The way she sees things, this sort of terrible thing cannot be. I'm not sure that my wife will be able to reason this out for herself.
Perhaps in time.
Perhaps. Perhaps for Jane and perhaps for Nancy. How's she feeling?
She was sorry she couldn't attend the funeral or offer her condolences.
She's seen a sorry sight now, Tom. As with Jane, they may take time to heal. Years. A lifetime.
I'm preparing myself for that. Physically, Nancy Beth is fine, but I begin to wonder if she'll ever go outside again. It must be some sort of shock. Henry, Nancy's mother died in her arms, breathed her last in Nancy's arms. My daughter felt her mother die.
As she did Sophie. Take care of her, Tom. Keep a close eye on her. Perhaps school somewhere else. Do what it takes to keep your child safe and happy. You've lost her mother. Don't lose the daughter. I've lost my daughter, and I refuse to lose the mother. It would be of help if Jane didn't blame herself for what happened to Sophie.
Jane blames herself? How?
It's silly, truly. But not long after we came here, back in the spring, before the girls arrived for their visit, Jane had what she called a premonition, a foreboding.
A foreboding?
A sense that something dreadful was going to happen to our family, to one of her loved ones. I gave it little credence. I didn't want her to upset herself, and I ascribed it to the change, the new house, the lilacs, this place. Once the trouble with the Reverend began, I forgot all about it until this past few days. Jane is inconsolable about it, swearing that she didn't heed her foreboding and her child ended up dead in a swamp. Jane's not to blame. I am. I brought my family. This was supposed to be our sanctuary.
Will you remain here?
If Jane will. They've told me it was an accident, that no one could have prevented it. That's fine to hear. I just don't know if I can live with it or if Jane can. She got to Sophie before I did. She saw her at the base of the cliff. The last few nights, Jane wakes after midnight in the grip of nightmare. She claims that Sophie visits her and cries out murder.
Murder, you say?
You hear me? Jane thinks our daughter was murdered and can't rest until her killer is named.
Does Jane name a suspect?
Our neighbor and yours, the Reverend Gaumont. That he did the deed to take his revenge on us for stealing his land.
Or what do you think, Hank? What do you think happened to Sophie?
I don't know what to think. The Reverend despises my family for reasons too baroque for me to truly comprehend. He'd like to eradicate us from the face of the earth. He spent months terrorizing us and threatening us and attempting to drive us from our home, but outright murder? I'm unsure. Would he go that far, Tom? What kind of neighbor is he?
Not much of a one. Henry, there's something you don't know yet. Now, you know that Nancy was there and saw Sophie fall, but you haven't been told yet what she told the police about how Sophie fell.
What did Nancy see?
Not see, hear. Nancy overheard a struggle between Sophie and someone else up on that cliff. She was not there alone. She was fleeing someone, pleading to be left alone, and then she fell. Moments later, Sophie's pursuer had reached where she fell and tried to snatch Nancy so she wouldn't tell what she saw.
Dear God, who killed my daughter?
Nancy says it was the Reverend Gaumont. When he reached out for her, she panicked and ran for home and help. When the police arrived, Gaumont was nowhere around.
Tom, I don't want to believe that it's gone this far. Perhaps the police should handle it. They themselves called it an accident.
And I tell you what my Nancy Beth heard and what she saw. My daughter tells the truth. Your wife's intuition is correct. The police ruled Sophie's death an accident because Gaumont rules this city and all but owns them.
Gaumont own Harborview? I've heard some other stories, but I assumed...
Don't assume. I've done enough background on the Reverend to know that when dealing with such a man, assumptions are deadly.
If all of this is true, then what are we to do?
We stop him. Together. Ourselves. So that the Reverend Gaumont never hurts anyone ever again. Are you with me, Henry? Will you stand with me? With Nancy and Jane? With Sophie?
Yes, Tom. I'm with you. For Jane, for Nancy, and for Sophie.
Can newspaperman Tom Dawson and lilac farmer Henry Pembroke band together in order to bring down the Reverend Gaumont? Can they nail the old villain for the murder of Sophie Pembroke before he strikes again? Return for developments in the next episode of Annex.